So I'm really looking forward to this. And speaking of which, we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our special guest here today, Mr. Tom Fanelli. He is located in the sunny state of Florida. He recently relocated there from San Francisco, where you were for what, the last 12 years?
Yes, I
Yeah,
was.
that's a big move. He's married with 4 kids, been in tech for 20 plus years, started his career as an agency owner, and I think that's really helpful in his current role as CEO of Convesio. Convesio is a new way to host WordPress websites that are faster and more scalable than legacy hosting solutions. And I'm in no way like paid by Convesio just to say this, but I'm a Convesio evangelist. I moved the majority of my sites over about a year ago, and I have been wildly enthusiastically happy. And I am not easy to please, and they do it just so well. Very, very happy there. And if anybody wants to talk to me offline about my experience there, anytime, because you just, when you find something that's really amazing, you really, really want to share it. And I'm sure that some of that comes from you having been an agency owner. You know what we are looking for. Would you say that's true, Tom?
Yes, I would actually, because I mean, I built this out of the desire to have a product and service like Convesio, and it was frustrating for me because when I went to California about 12 years ago, I went to work at a really small startup, which happened to be acquired about a year after I got there. And then the company that acquired us went public. And I spent probably the next 10 years in enterprise software. And I was frustrated because I saw the gap in all these awesome technologies that enterprises can leverage to host their website. And then I looked at things like cPanel and I'm like, this thing hasn't changed for like 20 years. And so I was like, I felt like hosting was stuck, with the notable exception of a few people like the Pantheons and Kinstas, which were trying to push things forward, who I admire several companies like that in the space. But I kind of thought to myself, you know what? I got to do this or it's going to drive me nuts. And a few years back, we started a little R&D project and it turned into Convesio. And it's been, an amazing ride ever since. And I remember the exact moment and day and place and conversation that I had with April when I first met her. And she's like, I'm a hosting, nerd, super nerd. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I don't know if I can win you over, but I want to be friends with you because you're like me.
Yep. Grilled you a little bit.
You did. Yeah. That was a great conversation. That was super fun.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. Last WordCamp we've all been to, probably.
Yeah, it was Miami, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's fantastic. Well, I'm gonna turn this over to you, and I think we are all just ready to hear what you have to say. So thank you
Okay,
for
great.
joining us today.
Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate you spending time with me. My goal today is to clarify a topic which I see a lot of confusion on out in the space, and that is understanding how to measure and improve and interpret your page speed performance. Now, why is this more important than ever? We all know that it's important to have a fast website for conversion and, browsing of the site, lower bounce rates, higher e-commerce conversion, all of that stuff. And that's all really important. But now Google is getting really serious about having core web vitals, which is their interpretation of these speed and performance metrics, core web vitals as a ranking factor. And this is going to happen sooner rather than later. And basically, this is now going to be part of what helps us determine, or Google determine, where your site ranks in Google in the index. So I'm going to skip my intro slide. April did a great job of that. Interesting fun fact. I was building websites in 1995 using a product called Adobe PageMill, way back when there was a company called Macromedia. And, I have seen so much evolution in this space. It's been crazy, but I started really, really early on, way before WordPress was even an idea in Matt's head, probably. Okay, so first, let's talk about really 3 ways to measure your site's performance. So on the left, we're all probably familiar with GTmetrix. GTmetrix is a third-party software platform, and up until recently, they had their own proprietary metrics to measure your site. And in my, there's other tools out there like Pingdom has a tool, but in my opinion, GTmetrix was sort of the de facto standard for agency owners who wanted to see how they scored, but also use a tool to diagnose and find issues. There are a few other tools out there that did this, but recently GTmetrix standardized on Google Core Vitals. All right. So they now have, back in, I think it was maybe November, end of last year, they had standardized, they changed their whole interface, and now they are using the core vital metrics to determine scores. Now, the other tool is you can go right on Google's site and you can go to the PageSpeed Insights tool and you can measure there as well. Now, there's another tool that you can use, which is in your Chrome browser. There is a tool, if you open up your developer tools, you will see a tool called Lighthouse, and it's a tab on the far right, and you can run a test, and that will test based on your local connection. Now, Lighthouse is the open source automated algorithms Google uses to do all of this analysis, and it's built right into Chrome. But I want to stop you. Did anyone notice anything interesting about all those 3 pages that I just showed you? And I'm going to flip back to them. Here's Lighthouse, here's GTmetrix, and Google PageSpeed Insights. Does anyone notice anything different about these? The score, the score is different on every one of them. All right. I mean, Google Lighthouse has a 96. PageSpeed Insights is a little harder to see here what the overall score is, but we've got hundreds in certain areas, and I've got a 92 on the desktop score. And this is one of the things that confuses people. These are 3 distinct ways to measure your site's performance, although they all use the underlying technology of Google Lighthouse. And I'm going to explain to you why this is different. And this is the biggest misconception and misunderstanding that people have about this. GTmetrix, all 3 of these use Google Lighthouse, but GTmetrix uses an unthrottled connection and defaults to a desktop browser. All right. PageSpeed Insights uses Google Lighthouse, but it is throttled on a G3 old mobile device that it's emulating. And this is why many times when you check your website on PageSpeed Insights, the score is horrible. It's way worse than your score on GTmetrix. All right. But here's the interesting part. Neither of those 2 are good to measure your site's performance for SEO purposes. You must use Google Core Vitals in Search Console, Google Search Console, because this uses actual visitor data. And this is similar to the Chrome test. When I use Chrome and I see my score is 96, that's because I'm on an unthrottled high-speed internet connection testing on a desktop browser. Okay, that score is what Google would track my real score as, and it uses those real scores to interpret your site's performance. And that is what it uses. It doesn't use PageSpeed Insights. It doesn't use GTmetrix. While they're all powered by the same algorithm, it uses Google Core Vitals. And this is what this looks like if you go into Webmaster Tools, and you'll see what your core vitals are. And here's why this is important. If you have a site that is catering to people that are, digital nomads, mostly mobile, perhaps in countries with lower speed internet, you are going to have a worse core vital than if you're an enterprise site catering to the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, where everyone's on a desktop device on a very, very high speed internet connection. And so this is a very important distinction that is really key to making sure you've got to be looking at core vitals to understand how Google is going to interpret your site. You can run these tests all day long. Now, a few things about GTmetrix that are important and will help you get to understanding a more accurate measurement for testing purposes. So first off, you must choose your location. Unless you have a CDN, and even if you have a CDN, your location is still highly relevant, right? So make sure you choose a test location that is both consistent. You're testing from the same location all the time, and ideally one that is close to your origin server, or better yet, if you're using a CDN, is close to a CDN point of presence for you. One of the biggest mistakes I see people do is they compare metrics from multiple locations, and they're not realizing these are changing dynamically on them. You know, it used to default to Vancouver. It seems to be defaulting to Austin now. There's also variances in location. So I tend to use Vancouver. I have this sneaking suspicion, and I run hundreds of GTmetrix tests a month. I have this sneaking suspicion sites tend to score higher in Vancouver. I think the Vancouver data center has a faster connection to the internet. That's my suspicion. I always notice much better tests for all sites that I score from Vancouver than I do from Austin. Okay, the other thing that's really, really important, this came up when I did a happy hour with GoWP. There is this thing called HTTP2. All right. And HTTP2 makes your site significantly faster than HTTP1. You have to have an SSL in place, and your hosting provider has to support HTTP2. But basically what this does, in the old protocol of this, the browser would have to make a request for every asset that is being requested on your website. So that means every image, script, tag. And as we all know, sometimes websites can have hundreds of these things. Hopefully we're all building highly optimized and efficient websites that only have like under 100, but I've seen sites with as many as like 280. And so the idea here is that HTTP2 will batch all of those requests together and send one request and get all the answers back for the assets. That is significantly speeds up the process. So get an SSL on your site, and if your host has HTTP2, you'll notice a really big increase in performance. All right, next, we're going to talk about how to read these reports. All right. Now, GTmetrix still has this grade notion, and the grade is really good. And a lot of times, if I were to see a report like this, I'd be like, this is great. I don't need to look any further. This site's doing really, really well. But we all know sites don't perform this well, and we have to investigate and we have to dig deeper into this. And this is where I recommend you click on the Performance tab. And the Performance tab is going to give you some metrics that are really important for you to understand how the site is measuring. Now, I'm going to give you some guidelines on this, but I want to tell you really quickly what I first look at here. The first thing I check is the time to first byte, and that's down here in the bottom here. I want to see if this is really slow or in an acceptable range, and here's why. If this is seconds or hundreds of milliseconds, 7, 8, 900 milliseconds, 1 second, 2 seconds. This is from the time the request is made to the server, this is how long it takes to get back the first byte of information. This is really important to diagnose, because if this is very long, and Google says it should be under 200 milliseconds, but if this is very long, it means your site is not caching properly. Now, I want to give you some information on caching. I'll give it to you here in a little bit, but this is a very easy indicator for us to see and understand, is the site caching properly? Because what happens 9 out of 10 times, if that is really long, PHP is in the background trying to crunch a bunch of data. And I've seen people install caching, but a page not be cached. And I'll explain that in a little bit. The other one that's really important is the on load time down here at the bottom. This is the perceptible load time for the end user. So when you have a website and, some examples you might see is like, I've got 200 milliseconds time to first byte, and I've got 2 seconds on load time, and I have a fully loaded time, this other one here, and that might be 5 or 6 seconds, right? The on load time is when the page looks complete to the end user, like it's loaded. The fully loaded time is when all of the remote scripts and assets and all the things that are not necessarily in the viewport of the page are finished loading. I'll give you a great example of this on our site is, and we just launched an article. We just did an article of how we switched from this legacy old theme we had from that and WP Bakery to Oxygen. And we sort of talked about the whole process we went through. Well, we have a chat widget on our site, and that chat widget has a fully loaded, it delays like 5 seconds. So that chat widget pushes our fully loaded time out for the amount of time that it's supposed to load. And it's actually one of these things where we made a business decision where we're like, well, we want the chat widget there. And, it doesn't need to load any faster than 5 seconds. So we keep it at 5 seconds. And so it's one of those things where it might not affect core vitals, but you might see a fully loaded time that's really long. So you have to do a little bit of work to understand, is the fully loaded time actually impacting my user's experience on the site? Okay. These are the things they should be. These are the recommendations. All right. So your first contentful paint, that's the first FCP is what they call this, the first big piece of item that is painting on your page. Again, your time to interact should be 2.5 seconds. Your TTFB should be less than 200 milliseconds. Your on load should be less than 2 seconds, and your fully loaded time should be as fast as it possibly can be, but there's sometimes reasons why it won't be. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to show you an interesting tool that you can use, and there's a link at the bottom of this. This is the Lighthouse scoring calculator. So if you're interested in understanding how Lighthouse actually works, you can actually use this tool, and it's interactive. You can drag these little sliders around, and you can emulate, like, okay, well, let's say I go in and I fix my FCP. What would it mean for my score if I get that faster? Because sometimes you got a lot of problems with websites. Sometimes everything's in red, and you want to know, like, what's the biggest thing? And GTmetrix does a really good job of prioritizing these for you, but you can go into this tool and you can actually emulate, well, if I got my TTFB to something lower, or my FCP or my speed index, what effect would that have? I'll give you a little caveat here. And actually, I think I did this for someone from the last call. We had a follow-up conversation, and I'm happy to do this for anyone here as well. If you want to grab 30 minutes of time with me and have you look at your sites, I can walk you through what might be the issues. But sliders, a lot of sliders drag down the performance of sites. They've got these big images in them, and sometimes people put single images in sliders and no other images, and it's got to load all this scripting to do the sliding, yet it's just a single image, and so it's really inefficient. And so sometimes you might have to make a decision like switching out a slider on a page to see if it's it will help increase your speed. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit more in the weeds. This is called the waterfall. And I know this might be uncomfortable for a lot of folks, but this is where a lot of the digging into understanding what is making your site slow, you can get a lot of insights from this. So the way the waterfall works, just to give you a very high level view of this, is down the left, you've got all of your assets. And at the bottom, notice how you can see here, we've got 17 requests. This is really important. I see a direct correlation between the number of requests a site has and how fast it is. Now, that's not to say you might not have one request that's really slow and it's dragging everything down. But as a general rule, if everything is relatively performant, all right, this number of requests, if you've got 200 requests, your site is going to be way slower than if you had 15. And it makes sense because the site has to fetch every one of those assets. And what you can see if you look down these columns here is you can see all the assets that are being fetched that are on your site, right? So I'm using my blog here, but I can see, okay, well, here's something from Cloudflare, who's Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics. And one of the things you can look at is, are the assets that are taking a long time to load coming from my site, or are they coming from third-party scripts? And by the way, you have to run a report many, many times to see these things. They will fluctuate in speed and performance. One of the ones I see fluctuate quite a bit is a product called Hotjar, which we all probably know and use, and I love it. It's heat maps for your sites and a bunch of insights. Well, I see Hotjar can sometimes load really slow. Like sometimes it'll take 2 seconds for that script to load. And sometimes it'll be like 200 milliseconds. And so you have to look at these scripts and look at what's loading. And you can tell visually over here what's taking the most time to load. Like I can see that this emoji, and by the way, many of us have probably seen disable emojis is one of the things. If you use a performance plugin, you might have seen that feature to disable emojis. Well, the reason is because this emoji JavaScript here, I think that's the one. I'm sorry, this is a font, but this emoji JavaScript can take some time to load. This is a font here. This is the Astra font. And if I were to look at this, you know, this isn't a large font, but it is taking a bunch of time to load. And there's things you can do to optimize your fonts for faster delivery. Okay. So all in all, this isn't a super long loading site, so it's not a big deal. But if you go through your site and you're only using 2 fonts and you see dozens of fonts loading, that's something you might want to look at. And you may want to use a plugin to unload those fonts because you are probably using plugins, themes, or something that are loading a bunch of extra fonts. I see fonts being one of the things that drag down sites constantly. So, all right, we're going to get a little more deep in this. One of the things that I promised I would tell you is caching. I see this as one of the biggest problems to slow websites. People do not have their caching enabled correctly. Now, I want to show you how to get to this. I'm going to flip back. If you look at this first request here and you open this little plus sign, okay, you are going to see the header details for this request. Okay. And in that header, it's going to tell you if you're using HTTP2 or not, which is, again, really important. If this says HTTP1, now you have to have an SSL for this. So you need to be using HTTPS as your prefix. But if you see this and you've got HTTP1, you need to go with your hosting company because that is the fastest, easiest thing you can fix. You might have to change hosting providers to get that. So, but it might be easy. I've actually ran into someone the last time I did this session, they weren't using HTTP2 and their hosting provider said it was going to be like a big deal to upgrade. Very easy way to fix it. Use Cloudflare. You can keep your existing host, put a free version of Cloudflare in front of it. You get HTTP2 for free out of the box with Cloudflare. Okay. Another thing I want you to look for, and actually this is using Cloudflare because we can see server here is Cloudflare. Now, you don't need a computer science degree to read this thing. I just want to give you some things to look for when you're on this page, all right? And those things are, look for anything that says cache in it, okay? And Xcache status is a common one. This is the Cloudflare cache status. So this page cached in Cloudflare on the edge, and the server, the Xcache status, I'm pretty sure this is the server cache status. So this was caching from the server as well. If you look at this, and I don't have any more example. Oh, I do actually have another example coming up for this, but I'll show you a different example. But look for something in the header that says cache. If it says miss, and I'll show that to you in a moment, if it says miss, you are not caching properly. And here's the caveat to this is you can have caching enabled. You can have everything toggled for caching. Everything says it's caching, but your page is not caching. Not every request caches. Not every request for a caches expire. They refresh. You could run a GTmetrix report and your page will be really slow. And if you run it again, your page might be fast. And the reason is the first time it didn't cache itself. And the next time you did it, it did cache itself. In fact, that can happen very frequently with Cloudflare because it's a CDN. You're running, you probably don't have any customers in Vancouver. Your site never loads in Vancouver. And so Cloudflare is like, whoa, we don't have a copy of your site in the Vancouver point of presence. When you just requested it from Vancouver, you got to run it again to get it caching in that location. Now, all that depends a lot on Cloudflare settings and whatnot, but those are the type of scenarios that throw people off on their site performance. Run your test multiple times. The score will fluctuate. The speed will fluctuate. If you're calling, 30 assets from third-party sites, those assets all have variable load times. You can't control those. They're not in your CDN. They're not in Cloudflare. They're not on your server. You don't have control over those assets and how quickly they load. So hopefully they all load really fast, but they may not every time. So really important stuff with that. All right, so we're going to talk about how to fix and identify and diagnose common issues now. All right, slow time to first byte. And I talked about this a bit. There's a little bit of review here. The biggest culprit of this is your site is not caching properly. Enable caching if you don't have it, and that should fix it. But remember, Google recommends 200 milliseconds or less. All right. If you have caching enabled and your site is under 400 milliseconds, it's probably acceptable. Okay. That's probably as good as you'll get it. If it's caching and it's 400 milliseconds, you probably need to get a faster host if you want to get it faster, or use something like Cloudflare. And by the way, I'm going to give you, I think, a really good piece of advice here, but if I don't, I'm going to tell you the hottest new thing at Cloudflare, which is great. I'll tell you that in a little bit though. If your time to first byte's over 700 milliseconds and you think you have caching enabled, something could be wrong. So you need to diagnose that more. Check the page headers like I just showed you, and then remember to test several times. Now, this is how you can see if your page is missing your cache. Okay. And so you look at this header information. And by the way, this is an image from Google Chrome, but you'll see this in the GTmetrix plus sign when you expand it. So, you'll see the exact same thing. See how it says miss and miss. All right. And so this is one of these ones that a request that did not cache. And this is what it looks like if it does cache. This is a hit. Okay. So I kind of, again, said this stuff as well as we were going, but the most common reason your site results are fluctuating is these third-party scripts. Another thing to be very cognizant of is that if you have third-party scripts and you're not in the United States and you actually have companies you're putting scripts on that are in the United States and those companies are not using a CDN, you might have to be making a trip from Australia to a server in the US to get that script. Okay. So keep that in mind. There's all sorts of geolocation things. Now, companies like Facebook and Google, all that stuff is distributed globally, and it should be very fast. The other thing that you can do is defer your scripts. That's another tip you can have. So defer the scripts to loading later. And basically that will enable you to say, you know what, I don't need to load these scripts until the full version. Sometimes scripts can be blocking, which means your site won't onload completely until the script is loaded. All right. That's the case for a lot of slider scripts. Now, most slider scripts are going to be locally hosted. So, but slider scripts, your slider is not going to load unless your script is loading. So if you have a lot of JavaScript to load to get your slider to work, you might want to consider not using a slider. A huge culprit of this is Revolution Slider. The other option is sometimes you can host scripts locally. If you're dealing with kind of a niche service or something like that, bring that script and host it locally. Make it run on your site. Move the script, move the reference to the script, and host it locally, and that can speed things up for you as well. All right, more optimization plugins is not the answer. I cannot tell you how many times I see people have 5 caching plugins installed. There is this prevailing thought out there that if I just keep adding, if I put in auto optimized and I put in, WP Rocket and I've got in 3 minification scripts, my site is going to run faster. Your site is going to run slower. And I will tell you, many times I have optimized a site and I have turned everything off and it's gotten faster. All right. You need to take a simplified approach to optimizing your site. First, start at ground zero. Turn all of this stuff off. All right. Just get your site running, put Cloudflare on it, see how it does, get a baseline established. Then, a lot of times I see people using Jetpack CDN. That CDN is notoriously slow in my experience. It's much slower than Cloudflare. So there's image optimization plugins. Those plugins can slow your site down. They have CDNs, and sometimes these CDNs aren't that fast. And so remove all of this stuff. I can't tell you how many times I've come in and seen people using 5 different CDNs for different plugins and different scripts and different deferring things, and it will make your site unstable. If you ever have an issue, sometimes what'll happen is caches, if you have 3 plugins caching, they're not all synchronizing the cache. So sometimes what can happen is one cache plugin will purge itself and it'll be trying to reference another cached file from another cache plugin, and maybe that cache plugin purged itself and it didn't update, and now your caches are out of sync and your site looks busted. So simplify everything and try to look at GTmetrix and deal with the biggest culprits. Don't try to, sometimes blanket things are good to use. Like I definitely recommend install WP Rocket, do the easy stuff, defer and minify your scripts, see how your site runs, and you might just get a winner right out of the gate. But if you have to do more surgical optimization of your site, try to fix the big issues. If you see fonts are taking a long time to load, try to fix the font issues, and try not to add 10 more plugins to do it. All right, so performance tips. And I told you I was going to give you one that I'm really a huge fan of right now. Utilize caching. We talked about that. Cloudflare APO. This is called the Automatic Platform Optimization. This product is $5 a month. And if you're on slow hosting and you need to give yourself a juice and you don't want to spend a lot to upgrade hosting to sort of a more premium provider, this product is really great. They have done all of the heavy lifting to make it one little switch that you push to do distributed caching on the entire Cloudflare network. And in my opinion, we do this with custom workers at Convesio, and we put a lot of R&D in this, and Cloudflare's gone ahead and productized this. But this is like full page caching on the edge, and it's totally WordPress compatible. It's designed for WordPress. So I love how they're doing this. It's a really good thing. And if you need to speed up a site that's really slow, try this. And I think it's really a great feature WordPress has implemented. It is not free. It is $5 a month if you're on the free version of WordPress. I think they include it in the pro version at $20 a month. Use an SSL with HTTP2. Again, another great reason of using Cloudflare. Again, take advantage of Cloudflare. Cache on the edge if it's possible. This is what's called full page caching. This is what APO does. This is what providers like Convesio do. Is we take your entire website by default. A lot of people don't realize this. By default, Cloudflare only caches your assets. It does not cache HTML. It caches images, CSS, scripts. It does not cache your HTML. Full page caching enables you to cache the entire HTML page on the whole network of Cloudflare globally. But there's some caveats to that. You either need to use APO or some special plugins, because There's some tricks to getting that to work right, but if you spend the time and do that, it's a major speed improvement. It's like you're caching your page everywhere in the world. Reduce the number of requests on your site. This is a no-brainer. Optimize image size and then defer your scripts as much as possible. But, all in all, try to keep your sites lightweight. Try not to add a ton of plugins, a ton of scripts. Try to keep your sites as light as they possibly can, and you will have fast sites all the time, everywhere for anyone. A little trick in this business. A lot of people come to us with really bad sites, and they're easier to optimize. Sites that are built really light and well and performant, you could host that site on really cheap hosting and it'll still be fast. Okay. You could host that site on, you could take a host that's $100 a month with all the bells and whistles, and you could take Bluehost. And if your site is caching properly and it's super light, it's like 17 or 20 requests, it's probably going to be fast on both of those hosting providers because it's so efficiently built. If you take a site that has 200 requests on it, that's where you're going to start to see the other hosting provider, the higher tier hosting provider, really outshine the lower cost hosting providers because there's a lot more margin for error in those sites. And when you have a really fast hosting stack, you get a order of magnitude higher performance. So if we all just built really efficient sites, life would be a lot better for everyone. But that's not always the case. Okay, so this is kind of our story a little bit. I was talking about us redoing our website and moving to Oxygen. And one of the things that you've got to sort of evaluate, especially and this is something to go with your customers if you're an agency, you might have to recode a website. You can't fix everything with plugins. You cannot fix every slow piece of code, slow themes. Sometimes you've got to get in there and recode things and re-architect things. And you have to make a business case for customers with really slow websites or inefficient websites. You might have to go to them and make a business case. And I like to think there's a different story here for recoding a site and redesigning a site. You can do both for sure and build it really fast out of the gate. But we made the option to not redesign our site because we knew that was just going to take too much time and energy. And we simply rebuilt it. And we got really good performance. And it's a work in progress. Like we still have a lot of YouTube videos on our homepage. Those things are very, very heavy. And we're really considering ditching them and making the site faster. And so it's a give and take. You're not necessarily going to have a perfect environment. Sometimes there's going to be business use cases where you might have to give up a little on performance. Hopefully you don't have to give up to be an F, you can still be a B or an A. But sometimes there are business cases that prohibit you from having the fastest possible site. Sometimes the fastest possible site is not the best business case for a customer. So go to your customers. Hopefully that will help you in making giving them some pros and cons to changing or recoding a site. And that is really relevant now because of the changes coming in Google in the coming months. So with that, I'll stop talking and we'll open the floor to questions.
Okay, thank you so much. I know we had some questions here. Beth, did you have a question that you wanted? Let's see. I actually have a question while we're waiting on Beth. When you were talking about optimizing fonts for faster delivery, and sometimes you might want to use like a plugin or something like that. How do you recommend serving up your fonts loaded onto the side or through a plugin? How do you recommend?
Yeah. So I will tell you that what I like to do is one, the biggest thing I see is people load too many fonts. And this is something I would go look for right away. I mean, if you've designed a site, you guys know as a designer, there's some rule, April, you probably know this is you never use more than 3 typefaces or something. And you can be loading a font and load the entire font family. you've got the bold, the italics, the this, that, and the other, and there's 50 variations of the font and you're only using one. So I do recommend that you figure out, and that is sometimes, quite honestly, part of a theme. Sometimes themes will load fonts. So go check out the typography section of your theme. If you're using, really popular themes like Avada and things like that, they have whole typography sections in there, and you can load and unload fonts and do all sorts of stuff. So go check there. As for where you want to load these, if you are using a CDN, I like to try and load the fonts from locally from the site. And there's a plugin out there. If you just type Google Fonts, local host Google Fonts, there's a plugin that will help you host the fonts locally. And so, there could be some benefits to that. You can get your CDN will be optimized for it if you're hosting it locally, because you're not going through the CDN. And I've seen faster performance. Sometimes Google Fonts are, Google's hosting that for free for millions and millions of requests. I'm not sure it's entirely the fastest service for hosting fonts.
Okay, cool. Beth,
okay, so I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Beth.
All right. So I host with Nexus.
Great.
And I just moved a client site to my hosting. We're going to be adding e-commerce, which is one reason I host with Nexus. So they do hosting, they do caching at the server level. The client, and this also applies to me, we also have Cloudflare. But my client also uses WP Smush and Hummingbird, but they're not using the caching part of Hummingbird. Is there something else I need?
I would say you need less.
Okay.
So first of all,
look, I took over this site from somebody else, and I'm going to be redesigning it in Cadence, the Cadence theme, and I'm going to be using Gutenberg. So that should speed things up a good bit.
Yes.
Well, I say that, but then we got to add in the learning curve for me. I'm finally getting into the block editor, making that leap.
I'm very excited for you. I've been trying to do that on my spare time, so we're in the same place.
It's not an easy move. My mind is having trouble, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So I would recommend, one of the things I'd recommend is, so first take the live site and run half a dozen GTmetrix tests on it. Okay. See how it's performing.
Well, I just did that. It's running at a B level.
Oh, okay, great. How long is the fully loaded time, or the onload and the fully loaded time?
Hold, please.
And by the way, everyone, don't just run GTmetrix on your homepage. If you've got product pages or big landing pages, go in Google Analytics, open the behaviors tab, look at the landing page section, and look at your top landing pages. See if those pages are loading fast. That's a big tip. Sometimes optimizing a site is more about optimizing a single page to load better than it is the entire site.
Hey, April, can I share my screen so I can just show him the GTmetrix?
That's fine.
Oh, well, let me stop sharing. This is much nicer. I can see all of your smiling faces now.
Are you seeing that?
I got it. Yep. Okay. Not too bad. All right. So if we look here, time to first byte is 450 milliseconds. All right. Onload is 1.8 seconds.
Is that too high?
No. My advice was if it's higher than 700, you have a problem. I mean, we might look and see why that's that high with caching on, but onload's 1.8 and fully loaded is under 3 seconds. I mean, that's pretty good, you know? Let's go ahead and look at the waterfall.
Like from the user end, it seems to run like lightning. And right. I didn't, where I moved them from was with their ad agency who was hosting but not maintaining anything. So everything was way out of date, but it was running like lightning because it was on WP Engine.
Okay, great.
So I was so afraid that once I moved it, it was going to get worse, but it's about the same actually.
Let's go ahead and look at the waterfall tab. Okay, good. And let's go ahead and just open up the plus mark by the top item in there. And let's just look and see. We're going to use what we just did and see if this is caching. Okay, now Here's a problem. Look at this. See the at the bottom of the top section, see how it says X cache NX Excel bypass? This request did not cache. It actually bypassed the cache. And that probably could explain why your time to first byte is so high. So you probably might need to run
I'm
this
sorry,
a few more.
point me again to where you're looking.
Can I annotate on your screen? Yes, hold on one sec. Okay, so right here, see this? Bypass.
Ah, okay.
Okay, see that's X cache status is bypass there. And so, that is something that you would, that's potentially an issue. And I would want to see that say hit. Okay, that is
dynamic up there mean.
So this is basically Cloudflare saying that this is a dynamic request. So you have Cloudflare running on this. And basically what's happening is, remember how I said that by default, Cloudflare doesn't cache HTML? All right. Well, that's because all HTML pages are what are considered dynamic for the most part in Cloudflare. It will cache your assets though. All right. So all the images and everything that load, they will be cached. I would expect, unless you had full page caching on this site enabled, which you probably don't because you'd know it if you did, that you would see dynamic here for most Cloudflare requests of the actual page.
Okay, so that's okay then to have.
Yeah, that's okay for there. But the bypass, you definitely want to see a hit here. You want to see hit. You don't want to see miss. You don't want to see bypass.
How do I make it say hit?
Well, I don't know. You might have to run it a couple more times. It might have just been this time. So if you rerun it, but before we do that, let's scroll on down for a sec. I want to look at the rest of this waterfall. Yeah, go ahead and scroll down over here. I can get a little crazy with my annotations. So, okay, so you probably should fix this issue right here. You got a 404, and this is a good way to see if you have some things. This pattern 2 is 404ing, so that's really good.
We've got several of those that I have to fix. This was a custom developed theme. It was done about 6 years ago.
Got it. Well, this is going to shave off some time right here, so that's good. All right. Okay, so let's keep scrolling down. I don't see anything that is super red flag here on this. Scroll up for me. One of the things I don't love is all this blocking time. So all this tan time here is what's called blocking time. And if you have like defer JavaScript enabled, or you have Rocket Loader enabled on Cloudflare, check and see if you have Rocket Loader enabled on Cloudflare.
So on Cloudflare, I should be using Rocket Loader and APO.
You need to check and see. Well, Rocket Loader's free. APO is paid. Check and see if Rocket Loader is enabled and test it on the site, because Rocket Loader can break sites. Okay. Not frequently, but it can. But Rocket Loader might, and it's designed to fix this issue right here, where what's happening is there is other scripts that have to load before these images can load. And that's called blocking time in tan there. And that's basically what's happening is the page is saying, I can't load. I gotta wait. And then when that script loads, it's like, okay, now we can load it. But as you can see here, it's like, this is a good 300 milliseconds of time that you're waiting here for these assets to load. So you could get the load.
I'm looking at these assets, and I had a meeting with them this morning, and most of those are going away anyway.
Perfect. Great.
When I redo the site. So
that all being said, this site's in decent shape. I mean, if you're, want to obsess over it and get it as fast as you possibly can, you could definitely shave off some time, but I wouldn't say this site's in bad shape at all. Under 3 seconds total load and under 2 seconds on load is good.
Okay. Thank you. That was super helpful.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Beth. We have a couple of questions from Jenny Munn. Hi, Jenny.
Hey, Jenny.
She is asking us, first one, should we run the tool for every important page or the home page only?
No, every important page. What's that?
I heard you actually address that a couple minutes ago. Every page.
Yeah, I would recommend for all of your important pages. And by the way, one way you can really tell this easily is go into Google Analytics, and there will be a speed test simulator in there, and you can look at the average load times of your pages. You'll be shocked because you'll see outliers in there where your entire site loads in like 3 seconds, but you've got one page loading in 15. And it's usually because someone put a 10 megabyte photo on it or video or something. So use Google Analytics to help you inform yourself on which ones to go tackle first.
And then she says, how do we identify what's causing CLS to have a low score?
Okay, so one of the things that I would recommend that you do is, and I'm just going to myself browse over here to GTmetrix real quick. And let me just pull up something. All right, so if you go into the performance tab wait, hold on, let me find it. Maybe, oh, okay, it's structure. If you go into the structure tab, it will give you all of the requests that are actually dragging down your various issues. So you'll see ones in there and they will call out. Now, by the way, CLS is content layout shift. And this is something that's really finicky because it's basically like Google doesn't want the page to jump around a lot while it's loading. And so this can be due to JavaScripts. Like if things are like being deferred, sometimes deferring a script will cause a visual abnormality because the script isn't loading till later. And then when the script loads, because it's deferred to the end or something, poof, something pops in. Google doesn't want that. They don't want a shocking, jarring visual experience when the page loads. And this is almost always related to things like, again, sliders, effects, JavaScript hover effects on different images and things like that. So my suggestion would be go look at the structure tab and it'll give you all of the critical things you need to find. And you can look in there and see, you can try and piece together like what are the things that are visually affecting the layout of the page.
Cool. Trisha's got some questions. She says, one, how do we defer scripts? And two, what do you think about plugins like NitroPack?
NitroPack. Okay. So you defer scripts by using a plugin like WP Rocket or W3 Total Cache. There's a checkbox in there that says defer JavaScripts. And there's various settings you can expose to get more aggressive with them. Okay. And it's pretty simple. There's only like 2 or 3 options in WP Rocket and W3 Total Cache, and all these various plugins will allow you to defer JavaScript. So that's easy. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I have WP Rocket, but I need to look through and see what's turned on and not.
Yeah. Yeah. I will tell you, you need to be cautious and test. Deferring JavaScripts can break your site. So make sure you're testing. Regarding NitroPack, for a while I used NitroPack. There's people on very different ends of the spectrum. I'll tell you why I stopped using it. So NitroPack uses some very advanced code to do what some people call trick Google metrics by deferring almost everything off the site. A lot of pure page speed optimization folks think this is like black hat cheating type of stuff. I don't get that fired up about the debate. The reason it can be magical. You can turn NitroPack on and it's like, oh my gosh, I went from an F to an A. And it can do some really cool things. But it's very aggressive. And the more aggressive you optimize bad code, the less stable your site becomes. Okay. And so remember, guys, there's a reason we want to build really, really good code. Okay. We want to build it because that is the most effective way to have a fast site. If you have to do a lot of Band-Aid type work to fix bad code, bad themes, bad page builder code, you have a higher chance of something breaking on your site, things not working. And that is just a I don't like being unstable with sites. And so that's why I stopped using it, because honestly, it's something that is, I found to be hit or miss.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Nice. Okay. Anybody else have a question? We are right at time, but I think we could do one more. Anybody?
Go
ahead.
I have one, hopefully it's just a quick one. So when you were talking about looking at your plugins and to see and just getting rid of all of them and then turning each one back on, you mean just turning them off and disabling them, not removing them, or and then turning each one on? Or is that what you were saying? Or are you saying actually remove them all?
I think you should disable them and see how the site runs. Yes, if you don't need them, you should always remove unneeded plugins, right? But just start by disabling them. And, you know, if you don't have a testing or a staging site, like if you don't mind your site being out of whack for 10 minutes at 10 o'clock at night when you're experimenting, fine. But, you know, Beth's site that she had, like, I probably wouldn't do it on an e-commerce site in the middle of the day, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to need to run some tests and do some stuff like that. So yeah, I would recommend disabling them, get a baseline of how does the site perform without any of this. And knowing when I enable a plugin and I enable a feature, what effect does it have? Is it doing anything? Or did I enable 10 things in 5 plugins and I have no idea which 1 or 2 or 3 of them is really moving the needle for me?
Okay,
Got it.
perfect.
Awesome.
Thank
Where
you.
can people find you, Tom?
Tom@convesio.com. And if you want to get a few minutes with me, you can email me and I'm happy to spend 30 minutes. I'll send you my Calendly link. I'll be happy to spend 30 minutes with you looking at your sites and giving you some feedback. I can't promise I can fix it, but I can hopefully point you in a few good directions. But yeah, you can do that, or you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever.
Thank you so
Any
much.
of the
So
social.
generous with your time. And so thank you for being here. Everyone, we'll see you next month at this meetup. We'll see you the first week of Wednesday for the WordPress meetup. And until then, take care.
Thanks.